Good evening. I will call to order Wilsonville City Council meeting for January 7, 2019, first meeting of the year, which is always a pleasure. And we're going to juggle just a very brief bit here at the front because we realized that we really couldn't take a roll call on members that did not officially have not officially yet become a member of the council yet. So we are going to start, if we may, with swearing in of our newly elected councilors. And I want to welcome our Honorable Judge Winehouse, who is our municipal judge here in Wilsonville, to come forward. And we have two people that are officially joining us, Councilor Lehan for a re-election, and Mr. West, who will become Councilor West as a newly elected. So would you like to join the judge up front there for a swearing-in ceremony? Yep. Yes.
Want to be first?
We're doing separately?
Separately.
Okay.
All right. Raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Charlotte Lehan, the undersigned,
I, Charlotte Lehan, the undersigned,
having been elected to the office of Wilsonville City Councilor,
having been elected to the office of Wilsonville City Councilor,
on oath depose and say
on oath depose and say
that I will support the Constitution and laws of the United States and the state of Oregon,
that I will
support the Constitution and
support
laws
the Constitution and laws of the United States and the state of Oregon,
and that I will faithfully perform
and that I will faithfully perform
the duties of Wilsonville City Councilor to which I have been elected.
the duties of Wilsonville City Council to which I have been elected.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Let's sign.
Oh, I have to sign something first. Yeah, that's always a good idea.
Make it legal.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, he will sign it right there.
Another copy.
The legal term of art.
Signing me up for 8 years, I hope. Okay.
You.
Okey dokey.
Please raise your right hand. Repeat after me. I, Ben West, the undersigned,
I, Ben West, the undersigned,
having been elected to the office of Wilsonville City Councilor,
having been elected to the office of Wilsonville City Councilor,
on oath depose and say
on oath depose and say
that I will support the Constitution and laws of the United States and the state of Oregon,
that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the laws of the state of Oregon,
and that I will faithfully perform
and that I will faithfully perform
the duties of Wilsonville City Councilor to which I have been elected.
the duties of Wilsonville City Councilor, the duties by which I've been elected.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And this one too. Congratulations.
Thank you. Do I get this back to you?
Thank you.
Well, welcome now, Councilor West, and welcome back, Councilor Lehan. It's nice to have you both on board here, and we look forward to getting some good work done here in the coming year. Ms. Velas, roll call, please.
Councillor West?
Here.
Councillor Akroval? Here. Councillor Lehan? Here. Mayor Knapp?
Here.
And Councillor Stevens is excused.
Thank you. Would the audience please rise and join us in a Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. Council, I'm open to a motion on order of agenda.
Well, oh,
Hey, Mayor. Protocol question. You have cake back there.
it's,
This seems like a logical time to take a brief break and allow those who have come to support the elected officials, newly elected, to congratulate them over a plate of cake.
We can certainly do that. I was going to do the agenda first so that we knew what we were going to do when we got back, so.
Cake isn't on here, so I just wanted to.
Yeah.
Anybody who's
yes, it is.
cake,
Just give me,
you know the cake is on my mind.
just give me a moment here.
Do you want to go? Oh, no, I will.
You got it.
Your Honor, I move to approve the order of agenda.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Moved and second, we approve order of agenda as published. There are copies on the counter at the side of the room for anyone that would like one. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Passes 4-0. And we will take a break for a few minutes, Mr. Cosgrove, so that you don't get your cake withdrawal symptoms so far. And we will have a little celebration in the back of the room.
No, but you don't have to.
So I will call us back to order at 7:54, please. And I had not formally scheduled, but wanted to give Councilor West a chance to make some comments to the public here and to the council. I think we'll do that now, following which we will lead into our citizen input and comments. So, Councilor West.
Thank you. I just prepared kind of a written statement on some thoughts about being a newly elected official in Wilsonville, my first elected office, and I'm excited to serve these 4 years. So I'll go ahead and read this statement, and then we can just move on. I appreciate the time to do this. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. It's exciting to see everyone engaged and energetic in the new year, and to take their oaths of office for a new term as city councilor members. I'm Ben West. My husband and I first made our foray into government when we helped overturn the state's ban on marriage equality. Additionally, we advocated for fixing our state's broken foster care system that's literally killing children, and we've been outspoken advocates for addressing the status quo. State and national politics can quickly break down into a blood sport of sorts. We can look to DC and become discouraged, outraged, disaffected, very easily, perhaps even more easily than ever. But here in Wilsonville, we have a better story to tell. Wilsonville is a vibrant community, the third fastest growing city in Oregon. As a fifth generation Oregonian, I take our state and local policies seriously. It's easy for us to all feel like we live in the most turbulent of times, but nights like this remind me that our communities where we can make are the areas we can make the biggest difference, where national politics and trivial partisanship starts to dissolve. Instead of seeing each other simply as Democrats or Republicans, we see each other as neighbors. We are neighbors. We are parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, brothers, and sisters, and children. I'm excited to serve my neighbors and to help ensure that we continue to grow as a community, that we minimize inevitable growing pains while pushing our community to be the greatest it can be, and to remember that we all must diligently focus on what is best for the families and the working people in Wilsonville. Whether it's ensuring that our city's tax dollars are spent wisely or that the projects are being approved to benefit the people who live here, the everyday issues like simply getting to work. We should work together to prioritize the Boom Bridge expansion so we don't have to hear so much about the negative news on the radio or on our way to pick up our kids from school. Traffic issues are a big deal when it comes to getting through the day. Housing is the foundation of a community. We need to make housing accessible and to put to rest antiquated government-directed approaches. We need to ensure that property taxes are not unnecessarily hiked to pay for crony contracts and inefficient government. But it is not just about adult things like tax code and infrastructure. It's about our kids too. Prioritizing the youth sports facility projects is important because it improves our kids' well-being and it makes our community a much more livable one. And with that comes economic development that infuses our schools and families with more means to help our kids grow and achieve fulfilling futures. You see, this is all a balancing act, and it's tough work. We are all here because we want to be here, because we care. We're not paid hundreds of thousands of dollars like congressmen or women. We aren't making six figures like the governor or special interest bosses. We're here because we care. My family moved here in 2014. I've grown up and lived in Oregon all my life. I've been just about everywhere you could visit in the United States, and I've chosen to stay here of how unique our state is and for everything it offers. Wilsonville started out as Boone's Landing, and it became Wilsonville back in 1880, and the city was incorporated in the days of Woodstock, and the population was no more than a large high school. Now it is a community of over 25,000 Oregonians, 25,000 neighbors. We are a diverse community, and with that comes a great responsibility. Thank you again for being here tonight. I look forward to serving my neighbors and congratulate my colleagues on taking their oaths tonight, and I look forward to the rest of the meeting tonight. Thank you, and I hope to serve as your council member with honor and distinction for the next 4 years. And one quick thing, I want to thank my mom, my dad, for teaching me to love my country and what it means to be an American who's involved and cares about his community. Mentors like Julie Parrish, mentors like Doris Whaler, and other people like my partner and my amazing son, who every day get in the trenches and battle with me in life. This means the world to me, and it's an honor to serve you. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Councilor. We'll look forward to a lot of interesting discussions this year. Councilor Lehan, did you have any little thing, or you've been here before? So.
I'm just here to have fun.
All right, sounds good. In that case, we will move forward into our citizens input and community announcements section, which is an opportunity for visitors to address council on things that are not on the agenda. Also a time to address things that are on the agenda but not scheduled for public hearing. Staff and council will make every effort to respond to questions raised during citizens input, either before tonight's meeting ends or as soon as possible thereafter. We do request you contain your comments to about 3 minutes. I have several speaker cards. Several of these are pertaining to business items that arise later in our agenda, and I will hold them for those particular times as they come on. But at least one is general and comments, and if there's anyone else that would like to speak in general, please complete a card and pass it forward to the city recorder. Ms. Whaler.
Good evening, Mayor Knapp and councilors. My name is Doris Whaler, and I live at 10668 Southwest Edgewood Court, Wilsonville. First of all, I'd like to commend the Public Works Department for the beautiful job that they did on our Christmas lighting. That was really nice. I think it's your position that you leave that up till the end of January. Is that correct?
Usually do.
Okay, I read your council packet about the county asking you to support the $30 proposed vehicle registration fee. I am in favor of that. What sold me is that some of the money that would be generated could possibly be used to fix the dangerous intersection at 65th, Ellingson, and Stafford Roads, a worthy and needed project. I also read your packet on the French Prairie Bridge. Unlike most of our capital improvement projects, this is not, in my opinion, an absolutely needed project. Rather, I would put it in the category of a regional nice-to-have project. So I have two questions regarding the French Prairie Bridge. The first is for Mayor Knapp. When the community survey was done, was there a question asking, shall we have this bridge or not?
I don't know the answer to that, and we have not reached a go, no-go decision, so that did not seem to be the first question that I would want to ask. I want to know more about what it would be before I ask people, okay, does it make sense?
We've done 4 community surveys. The only time we've ever inserted a specific question was on whether or not people would support an aquatic rec center and at what level in terms of tax dollars. We've never asked about specific infrastructure projects.
Right, that's what I thought.
Well, the problem with doing that is you'd have to explain the project, and you'd have to explain how you would get the funding to build the bridge. And by the time you got through the 5 pages of explanation, then you'd have to ask them to give their opinion on it. So typically when it comes to specific infrastructure projects, we wouldn't poll the community on that. What we do with all of our projects is we go out and do public open houses. We solicit people to provide input online or at city council meetings. So we have a variety of ways of soliciting public input on that.
Okay, so both from people coming up to me at the grocery store or on the street or the parking lots, and after reading the 200-plus comments in the packet, I believe that there is enough opposition to this bridge that at the appropriate time comes, that this should be put to a vote of the people. So right now, you are proceeding with the French Prairie Bridge to try to get some figures of what it would cost. And that will do nothing to alleviate our woes. Almost done. You've spent money on land for another pedestrian bridge from Barber Street to in front of Les Schwab. You've borrowed money to build a road in Coffee Creek for industrial development. You continue to add to the urban renewal debt instead of closing down the districts as was promised when they were formed. These are just a few of your actions that make me understand why some people say they can't afford to live in Wilsonville anymore. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public would like to speak in general topics at this point? Seeing none, I think we will move on then to mayor's business, where there is regrettably a whole bunch of stuff that we need to do. First of all, with a new council taking their seats here in January 19, we need to elect a new city council president. The city council president acts as my stand-in on those occasions when I cannot be here, and also frequently is involved in representing the city in some of the other venues around the area. We most frequently would be in a position where we would be weighing a variety of factors, including experience and availability for some of those other tasks. And I would like to recommend to the council that Councilor Ackerval be appointed the council president for the coming year. Just a one-year term would give us a chance to reevaluate whether it was working for everybody by next year. And so it's my recommendation to the council that Kristen Ackerval be appointed the council president for the calendar year 2019.
Your Honor, I move that we ratify your recommendation for the appointment of Councilor Ackerval to the position of council president.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second.
Moved and seconded. Any comments from the appointee?
I guess I would just say that I would be honored to serve in this role and continue the work, of council, but in addition, as you mentioned, the additional duties of council president. I've enjoyed my time in council and feel that it could be a good fit.
Okay. All in favor then, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye?
Aye.
Yes, aye. Yeah.
You're going to point? Okay, all right. Then it is unanimous, 4-0. Thank you very much. And I appreciate you being willing to take on those additional obligations or duties as they arise.
Thank you.
We also start the year by making appointments to our boards and commissions as needed to fill the vacancies. We have term limits on our boards and commissions so that we do get a slow turnover, but we also evaluate the stability of maintaining experience, and we are able to appoint people in most cases for a couple of terms in those positions, and we certainly greatly appreciate the work that those folks have done and the continuity they bring to those processes as they help new members become more familiar with our processes and work to keep the business of the city moving forward. So we have quite a number of these to deal with this evening, starting with the Budget Committee. We have two members that are currently sitting who are eligible for a reappointment, and in both cases, they have done great work. And one of them, Mr. Carr, has been in the position of chairing that committee, and I think that it would be very appropriate that we continue with both these people. Therefore, I recommend to you that we reappoint Andrew Carr and Paul Bunn to additional term on the Wilsonville Budget Committee, beginning 1/1/19 and continuing through 12/31 of 2021. Is there a motion?
I move to ratify the reappointment of Andrew Carr and Paul Bunn to the Budget Committee for a term beginning January 1st, 2019 to December 31st, 2021.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Passes 4-0. Thank you. Moving then to our Development Review Board, Panel A. We have a Panel A and a Panel B. Here again, we have two members who are experienced on that board and are both willing to continue in that job. And I heartily recommend to you the reappointment of both Jennifer Willard and Joanne Linville to an additional term, also beginning 1/1/19 and continuing through 12/31/20. It's a little shorter term than Budget Committee.
Oh, does that mean it's my turn? I move to ratify the reappointment of Jennifer Willard and Joanne Linville to the Development Review Board Panel A for a term beginning 1/1/19 to 12/31/20.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Passes 4-0. Also on Development Review Board Panel A, we have a vacancy with no incumbent or eligible person to continue. Actually, we have two such positions. And I recommend to you the appointment of Angela Nigley and of Daniel McKay, also for a term beginning 1/1/19 and continuing through 12/31/20. I'll give you just a very brief background. Angela Nigley grew up in Wilsonville, went to Wilsonville Primary School, graduated from school, went off to Portland State, got a architecture degree, and has returned to Wilsonville to raise a family. So has the kind of context that is really interesting to see. She's very enthusiastic about starting to volunteer here, and I would be very pleased to have her as a member of Development Review Board. Also, we have an application that I'm recommending from Daniel McKay. He's lived in Wilsonville since 2014. He has attended our Wilsonville Citizens Academy this last year. He's been showing up at a variety of different open houses and things, indicating an interest in what's going on. I had a very interesting discussion with him at one such event, and am impressed with his thoughtfulness and his engagement on a variety of different kinds of things. So it's my recommendation to you that these two parties be appointed to the vacant chairs on Development Review Board Panel A.
Your Honor, I move to ratify the appointment of Angela Nigley and Daniel McKay to the Development Review Board Panel A for a term beginning 1/1/19 to 12/31/20.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded that we make those appointments. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Passes 4-0. Thank you. That brings us to Development Review Board Panel B. Here again, we have two chairs that whose first term is up. Both parties are interested in continuing in their roles on Development Review Board, and I heartily recommend to you that we reappoint both Richard Martins and Sean O'Neill to continue on Panel B, term beginning 1/1/19 and continuing through 12/31/20.
I move to ratify the reappointment of Richard Martins and Sean O'Neill to the Development Review Board Panel B for a term beginning January 1st, 2019 to December 31st, 2020.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Passes 4-0. Thank you. We also then have an open chair on Development Review Board Panel B, and I recommend to you the appointment of Eleanor Schroeder, likes to be called Ellie Schroeder, to fulfill that open chair. Ms. Schroeder has been a resident of Wilsonville since 2014. She has a career involving a variety of different panels and volunteer things, including in Seattle, the Downtown Business Association, the Metropolitan Improvement District for Seattle, member of the Pike Square Community Development Association, member of the Pike Place Market Historic Development Committee, is interested in urban growth policy and has experience with that. She's a homeowners association president here in Wilsonville. She has a background in water technologies for municipalities. I heartily recommend to you the appointment of Ellie Schroeder to fill the vacant chair on Development Review Board Panel B.
Your Honor, I move to ratify the appointment of Ellie Schroeder to the Development Review Board Panel B for a term beginning 1/1/18 and ending 12/31/19.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, passes 4-0. Bringing us then to our Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, which is a panel that works with our Recreation Department and does a lot of work to keep our recreation facilities moving forward. We completed a Parks Master Plan last year, as you recall, and so the work will be involved in setting some priorities and helping figure out how to move that forward. We have 2 vacant chairs on the Parks Board and nobody eligible and ready to continue bringing about those 2 chairs. I have a couple of applicants I can recommend strongly to you. First of all, Mr. Dahe Chen, who has lived here a shorter period of time, since 2017, is very interested in the parks function and how it works in the community. He is a career professional in software. He is one of the more enthusiastic people that I had the pleasure to interview this year, and I think that his enthusiasm and kind of a different perspective from some of his prior places of residence could be a real addition to the dialogue in the Parks Advisory Board. I also want to recommend to you Amanda Aird. She has a variety of interests, but she has a background as a natural resource specialist and data analyst, and seems to be, again, quite keen on talking about how the Parks Department functions and how we're evaluating how that fulfills the needs in our community. She was educated in Oregon, has served on the World Salmon Council in Portland, has been involved with the school district in some of our surrounding communities, has worked in the health field with Regents, and has worked in the Oregon Department of Agriculture. So quite a diverse professional background, and I think that she would also be a very strong candidate. So I recommend to you the appointment of Dai Chen and Amanda Aird for Parks and Advisory Board, terms beginning 1/1/19.
Your Honor, I'll move to ratify the appointment to the Parks and Rec Advisory Board, Amanda Aird and Dake Chen, to the Parks and Advisory Board for the term beginning in 1/1/19 to 12/31/22.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, passes 4-0. Bringing us to Planning Commission, where we have just one chair, which is available, and the party that has been there for the past term is interested in continuing in that position. On planning, we have worked hard to have a variety of different viewpoints and perspectives available to the dialogue on that panel, and I think that we have benefited from those various viewpoints. I recommend to you the reappointment of Simon Springall to a term on Planning Commission beginning 1/1/19 and continuing through 12/31/22.
Your Honor, I move to ratify the reappointment of Simon Springall to the Planning Commission for a term beginning 1/1/19 and ending 12/31/22.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Nay.
Aye, so it passes 3-1. Thank you very much. That completes all of the board and commission appointments that we are ready to consider at this point in time. Sometimes through the year, we have changes that necessitate midterm, and we also have a variety of other volunteer panels, some of which are kind of ad hoc and don't follow regular schedules that may well arise. We have additional very qualified people that I had the pleasure to interview, and we will continue to keep them in mind as those other possibilities arise through the year. So thank you one and all, both the sitting volunteers on all of our formal commissions and boards, and all of the informal volunteers also, and all of those that have applied newly to join in those processes. Thank you very, very much. Let's see, that brings us to upcoming meetings. Just want to note next council meeting is Thursday, January 24th, the last meeting in January of 19. I invite the council, if you wish to note any of the community events that come up in the rest of January or early February. I think you have notes on those also. The one last thing that I need to bring up under mayor's business is a discussion that we had upstairs at work session preceding the meeting. I've been involved in discussions for, I've lost track, the last 6-8 years anyway, at the county level, mostly centered around the Clackamas County Coordinating Committee, and the discussion from the Clackamas County staff primarily about the extreme difficulty that they are having with maintaining all the roads in Clackamas County. There's about 1,400 miles of roads in Clackamas County. Much of Clackamas County is federally owned land, and they get no property taxes from private owners because their federal government is the owner of all those lands. Other alternate funding that has been available in some years past has kind of dried up, and there are no alternative funding mechanisms that are really functional at this point in time coming from that federal land ownership. The other counties in the metropolitan region have a source of funding coming from the local sector for their road maintenance, and Clackamas County doesn't. After a lot of discussion about the possibility of implementing a gas tax at the county level over some years, that seemed to lose its momentum, and the discussion that is currently sort of front and center is the possibility of implementing a vehicle registration fee for Clackamas County vehicle owners. I should note a couple of things. One is that Washington County already has such a fee, and at $30 per year per vehicle, $60 on a 2-year cycle for that. Our residents that live in Washington County are already paying such a fee. Clackamas County is seeking support of the municipalities within their jurisdictions to see if they could move forward with a $30 per year per vehicle fee. in Clackamas County. The fee would be shared between the cities and the county. 40% of the monies collected would come to the cities. Wilsonville would be, I think, the fourth largest beneficiary city within Clackamas County of that fee. It would continue going forward year by year. And the current estimates we think are a little low, but it would be some $400 and some $1,000 a year probably that would accrue to the city of Wilsonville to use on transportation projects. As our population grows, that would increase. And this county is also proposing to put part of their 60%, about 10%, in a fund to do strategic investments in partnership around the county. And the possibility exists that we could help prioritize some of those projects that would be near Wilsonville as we come and go. I think that we've heard mentioned the possibility of funding for the problematic 65th and Stafford Road and Ellickson Road. All three roads come together at a difficult intersection north of us, not in the city at this point in time, maybe would be someday, but it's already a problem and increasingly a safety concern. That kind of project could be a very possible candidate for some of their strategic investment funds also. So the county has asked all the cities in the county to entertain whether they could come to support that kind of a implementation of that kind of a vehicle registration fee. And at this point, having been in those discussions and having been in the discussion upstairs just a little bit ago, I think that it is prudent for us to support that, not because anybody wants to pay additional money, but we also all drive on roads around the county, and increasingly those roads and maintenance of those roads is becoming problematic. So it's my recommendation to the council that we would draft a letter for my signature in support of that. Does not guarantee anything would happen, but it may give a sense to the county commission electeds as to what the appropriate method or prospects of moving forward might be. So I'm open to questions or discussion from council at this point.
I'd be happy to say something.
Yeah.
As a former county commissioner, I can say that I know that Clackamas County is in a bind with the with taking care of the amount of roads that they have, with the loss of the O&C funds. The what's that stand for? Oregon and California?
Yeah, I think so.
It's something in California, Oregon, California. Anyway, the timber money that we used to get, even after we were not logging significant portions of the federal lands, but now we get virtually nothing for the O&C lands, and that has cut deeply into Clackamas County's ability to take care of the roads that are all over the place in the county. And I agree with the concern about that particular intersection. It's at 65th and Ellickson and Stafford. It is increasingly dangerous. You can tell by the amount of glass and debris that you will see at any time when you come through that intersection. And it is very expensive to fix it because of the difference in elevations of those three roads that are coming together there. And without some sort of funding like this, I don't see how there just isn't a source to pay for an expensive project like that out of the county budget. And it's still a good 30 years away from being in the city, if then. I also think it's compelling that we already have a significant number of citizens who are paying a similar amount to Washington County, that Washington County's registration. So it brings parity for all of Wilsonville citizens to participate in this, in the care of our joint roads, since we all drive on both Washington County and Clackamas County roads. And then everyone is, in Wilsonville is, there's some equity there for that. So I would support it. Much as I don't like to pay these fees, and I have to renew my driver's license this month, and that will be expensive.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councilor Ackerwall.
I would just reiterate some of the comments that I made upstairs when we, talked about this during work session, in that I understand road maintenance, if neglected, becomes much, much more expensive in the future. And this will need to be paid for now, or it will need to be paid for later at a much higher rate. So I think it is wise to take care of the roads that we have. And I think it's looking at the figures, and I'm trying to find that in the packet, but I believe in the presentation that we had upstairs, 14 million that we're looking at is needed right now.
Clackamas County's numbers show that they are lacking $17 million per year to maintain all of their roads in the condition they currently are in.
Correct, yeah.
Not even improving them.
So that to me seems very urgent, that we have some source of funding to not even meet those needs is the thing, not even meet the 17 million, but something is needed, and it's needed, I think, urgently, because otherwise it's just going to be getting more and more expensive. So I would be supportive of this for that reason.
I'm really torn by this, and I mentioned this in the meeting, as I really see this potentially hurting vulnerable populations in our city. I can just see that $60 bill hitting like I talked about, a single mom. That's a real story where she wasn't expecting that additional $60, and boom, there's grocery money or her kids' tennis shoes for basketball or to go to school. And then I just look at the litany of failed policy federally and locally on our state government that has really failed to address this issue. I mean, you brought up the timber money, which we took a thriving economy away from our southern communities, put them on federal welfare, and then pulled that chair out from under them. And now we see how they're suffering from that. Once again, like failed government policies. But now we're at the reality that we're at, where we have this big funding shortfall of $17 million, but I'm also like really dissatisfied with why we got here. And all I keep seeing is like everyday Americans really hurt by this, our neighbors really hurt by this, even in the southern counties. So I think that the majority of all the points that the rest of the council brought up are completely valid. It is a real urgent need, and I think we're all empathetic to that. But I think it's a case we have to take to the voters. I think it's a case that single mom should get to vote on and have a say in the county. And I am not prepared on my first vote to raise that mom's fees. And I just think that, like, at a certain point, a little bit of pause and reflection on a litany of failed policies that is now an epidemic throughout our state because of our inability to manage our forests. I know we're not talking about forest policy, so I won't dive into that, but that's where some of that money came from. So I would like to see us take a little bit of pause, and I don't think that hurts at all the need to take the same position as Estacada and Canby to see if we can put this before the voters of Clackamas County.
Okay, I would remind the council, I guess, that what Wilsonville does will not control what the county does. It is one input that the county commission will look at in deciding whether to go forward, whether to put it to the voters, whether, to carry through. So that's I guess, all I would say about that. Council, do you have a action you wish to initiate on this?
Your Honor, I would move that we proceed with a letter of support to the county, understanding that I don't know how the county will proceed, but I would leave it to the county to decide whether that involves a vote of the citizens of Clackamas County or they put it forward without. I think they will be weighing all those options. If there's a lot of opposition, it can always be referred back. So I think there's enough to recommend it to bring Clackamas County closer to parity and to be able to function at least semi as well as Washington and Multnomah County do in terms of road maintenance, that I would be fine joining. Again, we didn't mention, but the cities of West Lynn have already endorsed this plan, as have cities of West Lynn, Oregon City, Lake Oswego, Milwaukee, and maybe I forgot any others, I don't know. But I would join those other cities of Clackamas County. I think the county has also done, this isn't part of the motion, a good job. So now I've lost myself. A good job of making of involving the cities and allowing the cities to participate in terms of their road projects as well. So they haven't cut the cities out of this. And I think that's an important consideration that they have made. So I would move that we go ahead and endorse this for the county to move forward as the commissioners see fit.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I would second that as well.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Is there further discussion?
The reason for my second is that I feel roads is an essential. It's not an extra, it's not a nice to have, it's essential for us to have functioning roads. So that's why I would take that stronger position on it. And I'm looking at, in our packet too, the number of different outreach presentations that they have done, maybe 8, 10 different presentations so far just this fall. And that is encouraging to me as well, to see them, trying to have a dialogue with community members in that way. Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments?
And I totally agree with everything you just said. I just have seen the county and Metro and the state put forth similar, for different issues, but similar things, and they don't solve the problem, and the problem gets worse. And I just want to be convinced that that money is going to go to where it's going to go to, that it's going to be spent wisely, that we're not going to see it mismanaged or squandered in administration, that we just have a history of this. And so I'm just skeptical of it, and that's why I ask these questions. But it's true. It's almost at crisis level, and it's true. So I hear you.
And I would say this may have been squandered in other places. It has never been squandered in the city of Wilsonville. And one of the best things that we ever passed here was the road maintenance fee. And the road maintenance fee, when we passed it, initially was, I believe, $5 a month on your utility bill. And our pavement condition improved so much, as the mayor will probably recall, that within 4 or 5 years, we dropped the fee because we were taking in too much money. And it went down to $4.60 or $4.70 or something, because it really is true what Councilor Ackerval said. when your pavement condition gets to a certain level, it's really cheap to maintain it. It's very cheap to maintain good pavement condition. And we maintain, our goal is 80%, right? I believe 80%, it was 80% pavement condition.
70%.
70, 80%, something.
Say, and by ordinance, 100% of those funds have to be used for actual street maintenance activities, not for
maintenance.
administration. So to your point,
No.
Councilor, where a council could, in their letter, say, if you do decide to go ahead with an ordinance, that you'd want to see what that ordinance looks like, or at least make sure that, you know, whatever percentage council feels, you know,
Devoted to road maintenance.
right, not to fill staff positions if that's the concern.
Right, right.
Or administrative
Because,
overhead.
Because it is the one thing that you definitely get paid back for as a community. And you find another city that has better pavement condition than Wilsonville. I mean, you won't find one. And anyway, so pavement condition it is so much cheaper to maintain it than it is to fix it after those potholes get there. After it alligators up and you got to take all that asphalt off, rebuild the base. And I mean, that's just you getting into millions as opposed to a few thousand.
Am I right that this additional cost to the taxpayer, this fee, would potentially be on top of all of the stuff down the pike in Salem with tolls and infrastructure and all of that other stuff coming down the pike? So voters are going, in Wilsonville, are going to see additional costs in this realm, not necessarily from us or Clackamas County, but when you go to pay your tax bills, you just see it as like, my God, I'm paying a bunch of taxes and fees.
I think tolls, you just wound up a bunch of funding sources that are probably not linked in any way, but the VRF would be on top of whatever the state charges. So they would see that that fee separately, and it would be, I would assume it would say Clackamas County voter registration fee on top of the state fee. But in terms of what the state funds for transportation, that's mostly through state and federal gas taxes.
Right. I totally agree with you, and I understand that. I'm just saying as a citizen, and you see all that coming down the pike, it's just that it's on top. This is additional to everything else they're about to be hit with.
We never know what the legislature is going to do. We can't wait to see what the legislature is going to do before we take care of our own community. I mean, that is our role as city councilors. That's their job as county commissioners. We're tasked with taking care of our communities. The legislature.
I know, yeah, right.
We have good sessions and bad sessions,
Yeah.
but we can't not do something because we think the legislature might do something or not do something.
But I think what I hear you saying.
And I'm not saying not to do it because of that. I'm just saying to have perspective about what we're about to face,
I think
potentially.
if you're worried about the accountability aspect, I think that's what I hear you saying. Maybe not. But to me, the accountability aspect is if you pass it and you tell voters that you're going to do X, and if after 3 years you haven't done X, then I'm assuming there's some recourse there from the voters to say, well, you passed this fee and you said you were going to do this and you didn't do it. There's always accountability. I mean, you're always more accountable at the local level than you are at the federal and state level.
Agreed.
So.
And we did say on our road utility that if the county passed a road utility, which they tried to do and failed, that we would reduce ours. I mean, we would keep so that our people were not paying any more than that if the county, if they were, you know, whatever, that their road utility would not increase above what it already was.
Can we add that type of language, like you said, into the letter? Like you talked about, like you could say this caveat.
We could certainly add some language if the council wants staff to include some language, that it would be our expectation that if you do move forward with an ordinance, that to the greatest extent possible, these funds will be used for actual road maintenance. I don't see any problem in doing that if that's something council wants to do. If you're worried about that money being siphoned off to other activities, we can certainly include some language to say what your wishes are as a council. Right.
We would encourage that in their ordinance they include.
Yes. How they're going to account for and use those funds, not just I mean, we're accountable because we would only use them for actual road activities, and I'm assuming that the county is passing this to fund transportation, otherwise why would they be doing it? But if you're worried about that, we can certainly.
So does the maker of the motion want to include that kind of caveat?
That would be fine with me.
And the second?
I'll second. Oh,
Okay. All right, so that caveat is part of the motion now.
Is that Mark?
You already
The writer of the letter, did you guys?
Any other discussion? I'll call for a vote on the motion to compose and send such a letter. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Passes 4-0. Thank you very much. Okay, we now come to councilor comments, which can cover a variety of different things, and I will ask Councilor Lehan to lead off.
Actually, I don't really have any other comments this evening.
Okay, sounds good. Councilor Ackerwall?
Happy New Year to everyone. And I noticed on our schedule, rolling schedule of events, I will just highlight this one because it's always a hot ticket, and that is the Daddy-Daughter Dance coming up on February 22nd. Those tickets sell out so quick, right? So, February 22nd
Get your tickets now.
at the community center, 7 to 9 p.m.
Okay. Anything else?
That is it.
Thank you. Councilor West?
I've said a lot tonight, but one thing that I'm going to carry on Scott Starr's tradition is that you guys all know it. He had some words posted right by this screen here that reminded him of kind of the main thing as he served his neighbors. And they're three simple things, and I'm going to carry that tradition on here. We need to ask ourselves, are you wisely spending your neighbor's money? Are you respecting one of the main founding principles of democracy, personal property rights? And did you strive for communication, transparency, in the service of the public? And so I want to carry on those very important ideals, and they'll be sitting in front of whoever sits in this seat anytime they're here representing the city.
Thank you very much. Okay, that brings us to our consent agenda, where we have one item. If we could ask for that to be read, please.
Resolution number 2719, a resolution of the City of Wilsonville authorizing the city manager to amend a professional services agreement with Murray Smith, Inc. for design and construction engineering services for the Memorial Park Pump Station project.
Is there a motion on consent?
Your Honor, I move to approve the consent agenda as read.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Moved and second, we approve consent agenda. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes 4-0. Bringing us to our first business item with a public hearing on ordinance number 831.
Mayor, and if it pleases you, I will read ordinance number 831 and then follow with resolution number 2720, because the staff is going to give a report. They're all tied together, and then we'll vote separately.
Okay, can we take public testimony on both combined?
You don't have to.
You don't have to, you can. I mean, I think
I think there might be some comments on,
Yeah, they can testify, they can testify to address both at once, or they
Okay.
can do it separately, whatever you choose.
okay, please.
So, ordinance number 831, an ordinance of the City of Wilsonville, amending Wilsonville Code, Chapter 4, Sections 800 through 814, to address the new rules promulgated by the Federal Communications Commissions and declaring an emergency. That's the ordinance. And then the other new business is resolution number 2720, a resolution of the City of Wilsonville approving the city's small wireless facilities, planning application review fee, technical design review fee, and right-of-way access fee, and adopting design standards. And before staff starts the presentation, I will say we did receive some written testimony that should be admitted into the record. 3 letters, I believe. And Kim, do you have those there?
I think council's received all those, haven't they?
Yes. And I believe we also have people here to testify. I would say it's going to be one of the reasons we've pushed to do this more quickly than we normally would, is the FCC came down and surprised basically everyone with these new regulations in a very short time frame to put everything into place, with a deadline really of July 14th when applications can come in, and a 60-day shot clock starts.
January 14th, not July 14th.
January 14th, thank you. And otherwise, we would have missed it by quite a bit, I guess. Anyway, that didn't happen until the end of September, and so, given staff's other requirements, this has been a tough thing to get done. It's involved many, many departments of the city. I understand that providers have interest in giving input, and we're certainly going to be open to taking that. But in order to meet that January 14 deadline, in the event we get an application on the 15th, we really need to move forward with this. That's my legal opinion. That's not to say that these things can't be amended or changed if we find that there are issues in them. Again, we had to draft in a more expeditious manner than we would normally like to do, but it was something that was put upon us, not something that we chose. The changes to the ordinance primarily tried to address that 60-day shot clock, because prior, under our ordinance, this would have to go through the development review process, and there's no way we could make that deadline. So this will change it to an administrative review process, and then we will be able to make the deadline. And it also adjusts some height restrictions. Now, I understand that there may be some testimony that we got one part but not the other, and if that's the case, we can fix that. And then the design standards are also intended to work with the ordinance, and they specifically provide that if the design standards are different than the ordinance, the design standards will apply, because we know some of our older design standards, while we might like them better, the FCC is being more limiting on what we can do. And then finally, we have to set fees. Again, if an application comes in on the 15th, we have to have our fees set. They have to be actual fees, so we've gone with the recommended amounts, but with the caveat that we're going to charge actual costs, so that if the fees are higher, there will be an amount owed, and if they turn out to be lower, there will be a refund made. So that's just a brief introduction as to why we're going tonight, why we think we need to keep going tonight, and I will let staff provide details.
Okay, well, I will formally call to order a Wilsonville City Council public hearing on ordinance number 831 as has been described. Ladies and gentlemen, council will take public testimony tonight in a public hearing format, which will be conducted as follows. First, city staff will present their report, and then we will ask for testimony by proponents, opponents, and those neither in favor nor opposed to the proposed ordinance. If you wish to testify, please complete a speaker card like this from the counter at the side of the room. Pass it forward to the city recorder. When called, come forward to the microphone, state your name and address, and make your statement. I do request those providing testimony not repeat testimony already given. Simply indicating your agreement with certain prior testimony is entirely sufficient. Mr. Namsu.
Thank you very much, Mayor Knapp. I'm going to have Amanda Guile-Hinman with the legal department kick things off this evening, so right at it.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Mayor Knapp and Council. I'm Amanda Guile-Hinman, Assistant City Attorney for the City of Wilsonville. So this is going to be essentially a similar presentation to what you saw at the work session on December 17th, a little bit more narrow than that, but essentially the same report. So as the council knows, on September 26, 2018, the FCC adopted its declaratory ruling and third report in order. The declaratory ruling essentially did two things. It provided new interpretations to the Telecommunications Act and also created new federal regulations regarding small wireless facilities. And these new interpretations and regulations must be followed by both the state and local jurisdictions. So the key provisions from the FCC ruling, first on the interpretations, is that first and most importantly is that the city has the burden to show that it's not materially inhibiting a small wireless facility applicant. Now, that's pretty generalized, and so you're going to see that's why we get into a lot of detail about our design standards and how we're going to process these applications. The second interpretation is about fees. And as Ms. Jacobson indicated, for both our right-of-way fees and our application review fees, the city is undertaking to collect its actual costs. There's going to be a slide about those fees a little bit later on, so we'll get into the details in a little bit. The FCC also requires that any aesthetic requirements, so design standards, must be reasonable, no more burdensome than other deployments, and objective and published in advance. This is the objective and published in advance is the driving force for getting the design standards done in a timely manner, so we have something to publish for wireless carriers to look at. And then finally, on the new regulations are the shot clocks, and these are in particular where you're going to see the code amendments that we're doing that Ms. Jacobson mentioned. The first is a 60-day shot clock for existing poles. That means that from the date the application comes in, we have to complete the review within 60 days. Under a Class 2 administrative or Class 2 review process, that's just not possible, and so we're going to switch it to a Class 1. For new freestanding poles, it's 90 days, not much longer, and again, from the date the application's received to completion.
So resolution number 2720 are the design guidelines along with the fee schedules. And the design standards point out that we do not encourage and will not permit them to be located on our decorative streetlights that we find in many of our residential neighborhoods and in some of our business districts as well. Examples of streetlights where small wireless facilities would not be allowed would be on the Westbrook streetlight. There are pictures of these inside the design guidelines. The Westbrook can be found in the Villebois community. The Town and Country can be found in Charbonneau, as well as neighborhoods like the Courtside Estates neighborhood. And Acorn streetlights, which is a fairly typical streetlight, also found in Villebois and found, for example, along Boone's Ferry Road in the Old Town neighborhood. Where the design guidelines state that they can only be installed on shoebox style lights, which is a small box light, of which there is a photograph inside the design guidelines as well, and Cobra head style lights, which are the common street lighting style for arterials and collectors throughout the community. They're the large 35-foot, usually typically aluminum pole with the large davit arm that you would find, for example, out along Town Center Loop here. Otherwise, they must be freestanding poles that match the nearest poles in the area where the poles are being deployed. All of the equipment, cables, and wires that are necessary to serve the antenna arrays must be located within the pole and or underground, except in the case of a wooden pole. And because Wilsonville is an underground community, we have relatively few wooden poles. They're found, for example, along I-5, along Boone's Ferry Road. There are some in the Old Town neighborhood as well. But overall, wooden poles are not a prevalent pole type because everything is located underground throughout the newer parts of the community. Small wireless facilities can't be located on the wood poles in Old Town, and that's because of the historical nature of the Old Town neighborhood, the architectural overlays that we've got there, and its unique character as a unique neighborhood within the city of Wilsonville. The antennas should be contained in a cantenna, and that's a term that describes a cylindrical tube which the antenna arrays would be located within, and those cantennas must have a smooth transition between the upper part of the pole and the cantenna containment itself. The deployment of these facilities must not damage existing street trees, and the design standards may be modified by the city engineer. So that's a really important aspect that as we begin to engage in these dialogues with the providers, that the whole system has been set up to allow for minor adjustments to be made by the city engineer to reflect better ideas and things that the city is obviously in support of. So a few examples: the Cobra head light that I described is found in the image on the left. The shoebox is in the image on the right, and those are fairly common throughout the community. The one on the right is actually a picture very close to Town Center Park here, right in the heart of Town Center. The small wireless facility deployment would be appropriate on top of an existing Cobra head street light or a replacement Cobra head street light. And the image on the right is from a vendor who has been working with a variety of the carriers. That's an example where you'll see the equipment the equipment is actually located in the base of the street light, and the antenna stack is located within and housed within the pole itself. And then the luminaire, very standard, looks very similar to many of our existing Cobra head lights. So this is an example of a relatively new, what I understand to be a relatively new type of a light pole that is being provided specifically to accommodate the deployment of this technology in cities throughout the country. A couple of additional appropriate deployments. You'll notice the image on the left is a freestanding deployment. The equipment is located underground. The pole would match the nearest adjacent pole, whether it be black or silver. And the cantenna, again, has a smooth transition to the pole, and the equipment cabinet is, again, not out of character with the size of the upper pole. And in wood poles, an appropriate deployment here would be a strand-mounted antenna, again, with the inability to be inside the cabinet. A variety of equipment would be below ground, so there would be some ancillary wiring that would be on the exterior of a wood pole in this particular situation. A couple of additional diagrams that are found inside the design guidelines include where they would be encouraged in residential areas, and you'll note that this image is intended to show it between property lines, essentially on the property line, and there are some dimensional standards that are contained within the design guidelines. The image on the right is a streetscape image. This, you have seen these in other places, but this is not a pole made to look like a tree, but this is a pole that has been installed between the trees. So suggesting that being in the planting strip between existing street trees in alignment with them is really what the intent of this diagram is attempting to depict. Commercial zones, again, at property lines. This is an example where you have an adjoining, abutting zero lot line condition where there's no setback or space between the structures. But in commercial zones and in industrial zones, we don't want the deployment to be immediately in front of the primary dwelling or of the primary entrance to the business, and do not want to see these in front of service entries. And again, trying to get them at the property line so that they don't conflict with visitors coming and going to existing businesses and to industry as well. So in commercial zones, again, encouraging those at the property line.
So going through some of the deployments that won't be appropriate under our standards. First, as Chris mentioned, on decorative light poles, they will not be allowed. So these are examples of the Acorn, Westbrook, and Town and Country. Just for a point of reference, these are also in the design standards. Also, any visible equipment shroud is not allowed. So I'm gonna steal the mouse here. If you look like this box right here, and this box right here, the box right here, those wouldn't be allowed. So either the equipment needs to be housed within the actual pole or underground as part of the deployment. Next would be the ground mounted. So to the extent that equipment is allowed within the pole, we have dimensional standards that make it essentially a continuation of the pole. So these huge boxes that you see at the bottom of a pole wouldn't be allowed. We require there to be a smooth transition and maximum a 1.5-inch horizontal lip. And part of the reason for that is, I think it's referred to as the
Starbucks
shelf or something like that. So basically people can't set a coffee cup on it while they're walking by and leaving trash on it, basically. And also it discourages graffiti. If you look at that first picture on the left, there's some graffiti on it. So if it looks as part of the pole, we're hoping to discourage some of that type of behavior. For wood poles, the biggest thing that we would be not allowing is for the equipment shrouds to be located on the pole. So if you recall the example Chris gave, it was strand mounted, meaning it was on one of the lines on the pole, or there would be a line on the pole rather than, or strung from the pole rather than being attached to the pole. But again, there's very few wood poles in the city where these deployments would actually even occur. So, oh, go ahead, sorry, I'm sorry. No, I'm trying to take over for him.
These are the application fees. The city recently went through a consultant-led process to update our planning fees. And so we came up with a $335 application fee through that planning fee review process. The FCS consultants guided us through that. So that number represents the true cost of what it takes city staff to process a Class 1 application. So that includes administrative time, it includes mailings and any other necessary activities, file setup, and all of those types of things. The technical design review fee is $300 times the number of locations, and it's important to note that that would result in either a refund or additional billing based on the actual cost of what it took the city staff to evaluate each one of those unique deployments. So if you recall, you can have up to 5 locations in an application, and within each of those 5 locations, we would charge the $300 per deployment, and that's because we need to engage engineering and public works on each of the unique circumstances that surrounds each of these unique sites. Not all sites are equal. The poles may be equal, but each site has unique configurations and constraints in the form of above and underground utilities that can make these reviews quite challenging. So that, again, that $300 times the number of deployments rolls up, and then at the end of that cost, time is kept on by the staff for the review of each of these, and either there's a refund or additional dollars that are collected as a result of that. And then there would be a right-of-way lease fee, and there'd be a requirement for a lease agreement, and there would be obviously negotiations that go into the lease agreement. So this outlines in a nutshell the fee schedule that we've come up with for the deployment of these actual structures.
And as we've mentioned in the work session, there's some Wilsonville code updates that also go along with what we're doing for the design standards. Mainly is the application review, changing it from a class 2 to a class 1 so we can meet the shot clocks. There's also the height limitations to be consistent with the FCC's definition. And I also want to mention, as council knows, we've engaged a consultant to help us throughout this process. And as reflective of the time constraints we've been on, this is essentially sort of the first round of code updates. We anticipate there may be additional code updates needed when we have time to do a more full review. So that's why, one, we've focused on the most important thing, which is the class 1 administrative review so we can meet the shot clock, but also making sure that the design standards trump any inconsistencies with the code, because that's where we've been able to spend our time in this short amount of time. But we do anticipate that there may be some additional review, and our consultant is working with us on that process, going through more holistically that section of the code. So again, the next steps tonight is the first reading on the ordinance to amend Wilsonville Code 4.800 through 4.814. And then also the council will be considering the resolution to adopt the fees that we've outlined and the design standards. On January 24th, at that council meeting will be the second reading, and we'll be asking for an emergency declaration to have it go effective January 24th. And I'd also like to point out, I believe that Kim has distributed the new ordinance. Yes? Okay. Reflective of how quickly we've had to operate, there was a couple minor changes I noticed needed to be made in the ordinance. Particularly, it was originally drafted to have both readings happen tonight, which is what we were hoping to do, but we weren't able to do that because of scheduling. So it's been amended to reflect that the second reading will happen on January 24th. So just a minor change. And then also, the council has received some minor changes to the design standards. The first is on page 4 about the standard for deploying the small wireless facilities. I believe that's been distributed to the council, and that has been in response to one of the comments that we received from the providers. And then also there was some clarification on the deployment section, the examples of appropriate and inappropriate deployments, just making it clear what's acceptable and what's not acceptable under these design standards. So those are the few minor changes that we had since the council packet was distributed to the council.
And for the record, quickly, those are over to the side of the room as well, and I believe I've provided copies to all of the providers who are in the room who may wish to testify.
So these that are on our dais tonight are the current recommendations of staff?
Yes, this first one is the language change that is the result of a comment made in one of the letters that we felt was valid, and then the revised drawings were thanks to a comment by the mayor saying that we could be more clear on which pictures showed acceptable ways of doing it and which ones were unacceptable. So that's really the only change there, was just to clarify that.
Okay. Council, questions for staff on what you've heard here?
I have a question.
Mr. Councilor West.
So if the providers want to put poles up in Villebois that meet the neighborhood aesthetic, they would they can't do that, or do they have any options to do that if they want to? So like, let's say it's an Acorn one, like by my house. Do they have the ability to like, to retrofit that somehow, or
Their option would be a freestanding pole.
that's the only option? They can't like make a new light fixture that just matches the aesthetic of the neighborhood?
That's something that we could look at in the future. That's something that I think when we talk to the providers and also in particular talk to the manufacturers, I believe that Public Works has been in talks with a particular manufacturer of poles. That might be an option for some of the decorative lights, but with how quickly we had to turn this around, that wasn't something that we could get into that much detail. I do think that is an adjustment that may be possible in the future.
And so right now, the only option is that Q-tip looking pole?
Correct.
So what happens if it's not, so ideally you said you want them to be on property lines. So what happens if that is more than 200, the next property line to discreetly put it in the appropriate place is not 250 feet away or is not within that range? Is that going to end up in someone's front door? Because you had the picture of the commercial picture, and then you had like the post, and you said ideally we want it on the property line so it doesn't like end up in a glaring on someone's window or on their front door in one of your photos. And I was wondering, like, what if it doesn't measure out that way with property lines? Is that person gonna be stuck with that pole stuck in a place that wouldn't it be good to stick it, I guess?
So one of the freestanding pole requirements says, freestanding poles shall not be located along the frontage of any building that is deemed that's just for historic buildings. That's maybe a fair point, and I see that we have something in our commercial and industrial areas that does say that they shall not be located in a storefront, window, primary walkways, entrances, or exits, so I think it's probably appropriate to have something like that in the residential zone as well.
That would be great. I just am concerned because Wilsonville is known for its beauty and its livability. And I don't think it should have to be an either or. We sacrifice our beauty and livability for this new jazzy piece of technology. And so that's my concern. I want to make sure it doesn't affect.
Okay, let me clarify, sorry, I'm reading this on the fly, so I apologize.
right.
There is a standard under residential areas that says, freestanding poles shall be located on corners or along property lines between lots and at least 5 feet from any driveways, curb cuts, or other access points unless approved in writing by the city.
Okay.
Does that get to your point? I apologize that
Yeah.
I didn't have that at the ready.
No, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you, staff. We've got several people who would like to speak. I've got a couple of people indicating they're from Verizon, I think, are Donna Barrett and Steve Kuhn. Are you both from Verizon? Would you like to come up together and each?
Actually, I'm Kim Allen. I'm also from Verizon.
Oh, we got three. Okay, didn't see your Verizon listing. If you all three would like to come up, we've got 3 spaces here for you. And I guess we can give you each 3 minutes. Yeah. Good evening.
Okay, I guess I'll kick it off and then head down the row here. My name is Kim Allen. I'm with the Wireless Policy Group. I'm a senior vice president there, and I've been hired as a consultant by Verizon Wireless to help with the deployment of small cells in the Pacific Northwest. I did send you a letter, and thank you very much, Mayor Knapp and councilors, for this opportunity to talk to you about small wireless facilities. The reason why we are here is to ask primarily that the design standard piece of both the ordinance and the resolution be taken out and delayed a little bit. In the last FCC order that denied the request for a stay of the order, the FCC clarified some of the guidelines or some of the deadlines that they had stated in their original order. And right now, the deadline for cities to enact aesthetic standards is April of this year. So there's some time to seek input from the providers. We reached out to the city in November on behalf of AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile, but with a letter saying we'd like to do a presentation for the council. We'd like to sit down and talk about these design standards because we know they're highly technical. It's not something that staff is used to working with on a day-to-day basis. And we were not invited to work with staff on that. I asked to be an interested party so that I could keep abreast of what was going to be going on back in November by email. And I also was not notified of the fact that you were going to study session in December and that this was moving ahead so quickly. In fact, someone in our industry inadvertently ran across the staff packet on January 3rd. And that was the first time that we saw it. That circulated throughout all of the major carriers. We tried to, dig into the ordinance and red line, and certainly in my letter, I pointed out a couple of problems with the ordinance that are significant for us. One of them is the antenna requirement. 5G antennas cannot be shrouded. They can't even be painted. They're that sensitive. And so I noticed that at the beginning of the work session, this was introduced as 5G technology. And quite frankly, that one requirement will effectively prohibit the deployment of 5G in Wilsonville. We would like to have an opportunity to sit down with staff to work through the technical requirements for 5G and for 4G to implement additional capacity there before you implement design standards. You have the time. The cities have the time to get this right, and we would very much appreciate the opportunity. We can work very quickly. Today, Mr. Kuhn and I met with the city of Tigard. We met with Tegan Inslow there. She's taking input and intends to turn around an ordinance based on some of the feedback by next week. We're working with cities all across the Metro Portland region right now that are facing the same challenges as Wilsonville. So our request is, I understand that you want to go forward on the process piece and on the fees piece, and that's fine. We would just ask that the portion of the resolution that deals with design standards be moved and travel forward with the ordinance that's going to come back on January 24th to give us some time to give some detailed input on some of the things that are frankly just deal breakers for 5G that technically will not accommodate the technology. We heard some discussion of undergrounding radios. Now in California, where a number of the wireless consultants that are working on these codes come from, it's pretty dry in California. It's not so dry here. And undergrounding radios for this technology ends up in heavy corrosion, and it really is an unworkable solution. So there's some of those technical details that we would really like to sit down and explain, show our math, show our pictures about what this technology needs to look like to be deployed here in Wilsonville. We'll hear from my colleague who is actually a resident here, but that is our ask at this point. There are some significant issues with even meeting the FCC order in 480107B. The height restrictions, they're not quite there. They're listed as an either or, whereas in the FCC order, they are the greater of one or the other. So we're just asking for some time. We just found out about this. We would like to get down to the table, and if we could just move off those design standards for a couple of weeks, I think that we could have something that's very workable for the industry. Thank you.
Okay, you've used more than half of your three people's time, so I don't know how you wish to handle the remaining 4 minutes.
I'm Donna Barrett, and I live at 10947 Southwest St. Moritz Loop here in beautiful Wilsonville. I'm very proud to say that I've lived in this community for 6 years. I moved here from Texas for a job, and I landed in a rental in Old Town in Wilsonville, and I fell in love with the city, and hopefully will live here until I die, which will be a very long time from now, hopefully. But I'm also proud to say that I am in-house counsel for Verizon. And what Verizon is trying to do with the deployment of this new technology is nothing short of amazing. But to Ben's point, I'm sorry, Mr. Counselor West, I'm not even sure what I'm supposed to call you, Counselor West, who also lives in Villaba, I understand. I don't want freestanding poles put up all over my neighborhood. But also, I understand that there is no above-ground utilities in the neighborhood. So basically, passing the design standards as they're currently written would be a prohibition of any of this new technology service in my neighborhood. Because the only light standards in our neighborhood are the decorative light standards. And there is no overhead utilities. So that would be, a prohibition of any kind of service within that area. And thinking about it, living in Wilsonville, I can't think of many facilities under the currently proposed design standards that would qualify as something that we would be able to deploy any kind of a small cell on. So that's really concerning to me as a citizen and also as a representative of Verizon, because I'm very excited about the technology. It's, wireless is no longer just the next new thing. It's part of our infrastructure now, and it's very important for the future and the things that are coming that you haven't even heard of yet that we would love to tell you about. We would love to come in and talk to you and explain to you the reason that this is so important, the reason that we're doing this, and how it can improve our community. So I really ask that you take the opportunity to meet with the stakeholders, let us educate you more on the technology and on our issues that we're having on the provider side, and let's come up with something that we both like, that the community will like. And I will end with that and pass on to Mr. Kuhn.
Hi, my name is Steve Kuhn, and I work for the Verizon Wireless Network Engineering Team, and I'm based in Hillsboro. One of the things I'd like to point out, 5G, yes, will bring lots of great new services, things that we can't even dream of right now, just like 4G did. However, it also, there's a capacity issue. So wireless data usage is growing at 50% a year. It has been doing that for the last 10 years. And so we have a capacity constraint too. So it's not just new services, it's driving down the street in your neighborhood and having 4 bars, but not being able to download anything, not being able to send any emails. That's the capacity constraints that we're gonna run up against without small cells with this huge uptick in data services every year. We've met, Kim said we met with Tiger this morning. I'm also meeting with the League of Oregon Cities. So League of Oregon Cities and the industry got together in October, and now we're starting to form groups. So the groups are model code, and then design standards and education. And we'll see what comes out of that, but I'm looking forward to that piece of it, working with the League of Oregon Cities. And I don't know if you are in the League of Oregon Cities or if you're interested in what we come up with from that, but I think that'd be a good thing going forward. One thing I'd like to discuss, and can I talk about fees for just a second?
If we could have just a couple minutes, Mayor, because we're addressing both of your agenda items in one
Well,
sitting.
the other one is not scheduled for a public hearing, so
Touche.
take a couple if you would, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So when Verizon looks at deploying 5G or any wireless infrastructure in a city, it goes through a business case. And as you might imagine, we don't have all the money in the world, so we have a business case. And in this case, we have a couple of variables that we don't know what they are. So we don't know what the right-of-way fee is going to be, for instance. We also don't know really what the permit fee is going to be. We put some money in a pot, and then the city tells us at the end, okay, you owe more or you get money back. Thinking that, we like predictability, and we have to have predictability to determine what our costs are going to be. So if we're doing a business case in a city compared to other cities that have predictable costs, it's going to be difficult to formulate that opinion with these kinds of fees.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Richard Roche, please.
Good evening. My name is Rich Roach. I am with AT&T, Statewide Director of External Affairs, and the Lone Ranger tonight. As an industry, we're working very closely together, working with cities, jurisdictions through this process. So everything that Verizon shared here is exactly what I would say. Now, that's a nice cop-out. No, but what they shared are, where we stand. One of the things with the ordinance as it's going through tonight, hopefully you'll take a little bit of time, pull the design standards out, because the problem for us is really the design standards. We're trying to figure out how your design standards comply with the FCC order, as well as what we can do. And it's really hard for any city. In fact, tomorrow I'm meeting with the city of Tigard. Verizon met with them today to work on their design standards, because design standards have to be not only guidelines that you guys think are right, but things that work with our equipment. It's sort of like trying to build a garage and you don't know what a car is that's going to be in the garage. Because there's certain size, attachments, everything else that have to be discussed. And the other thing is, I believe that we can come up with some creative design alternatives that possibly staff hasn't looked at, that other vendors haven't looked at, that we as an industry can come forward with to address the needs of the city. None of us want to build anything that's a blight on any city, because the people who live in the cities are also our customers. So we want to do the right thing, build it the right way, and make sure that we can move together as we try to build the network. So if you have any questions, I'm here to answer any questions, but I do request that you do take the design element part, design standards out of this, and let us work with your staff. The industry together can work and hopefully come up with something that works well for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have no other speaker cards. Is there any other member of the public that would like to speak on this topic? Could we ask for staff to come back up then? Not seeing anyone else that would like to testify, I'm going to close the public hearing at this time.
I have a question, really quick. Just because I'm new to the polling.
Hang on.
Oh.
You need to be recognized before you speak.
Okay.
Mr. West, what's your question?
So you, previous to our conversation, I'm new to the whole parliamentary proceedings and all that, so I apologize. Do we have the opportunity now, during the hearing, to address the speakers that just spoke? Can we ask them questions, or I'm just asking how?
It's not typically a dialogue. It's an opportunity for, during a public hearing, for citizens or interested parties to present their case to council, whether or not they agree with a particular ordinance or ordinance usually. And then you take all that into consideration. You can certainly ask questions of staff,
Okay.
Which I think is what the mayor's trying to do now.
Yes, that's what I intend to do,
address
is
some of
to,
these questions. So I was just
try
thinking
to address
questions.
staff and ask if they have some input on any of the questions that have been raised by
And
the
then you can
testimony.
you can also ask the city attorney and the city manager questions at the conclusion as well, if there's a legal issue or a process issue.
If you do have a specific question for a speaker after you've talked to staff, then you can direct that question if you don't feel like you've got
That's
the
the
answer.
answer to-
So, yes, so
Okay.
if before you close the hearing, if you want to ask questions of staff and determine whether you need to speak with the member
Okay.
of the
Industry.
Yeah, we,
industry person.
Thank you.
Okay, staff, do you have comments you wish to address on topics raised by the testifiers?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Knapp. And I'll start off again, Amanda Guile Hinman, and Chris, feel free to add in as you see fit. So the first comment that I want to address, which I think, other than maybe some wording issue on the ordinance, it sounds like the main question is about the design standards, which isn't part of the ordinance. It's part of the resolution that council is considering today. And as I'll just reiterate, it is something that can be administratively amended over time, the way the resolution is currently drafted. So on that level, I think some concerns might be able to be subsided with the ability for staff to make some changes. But the main reason that we are still moving forward with the design standards, despite the fact that the FCC has delayed the requirement for the implementation for design standards, is because every other requirement that the FCC has placed on the cities goes into effect on January 14th. So that means the shot clocks still have to be met. That means that, so in particular, our review needs to be on point. And so we need to have some type of framework for staff to understand what's required or not required starting January 14th. So it seems actually somewhat inconsistent for the FCC to delay the design standards, because they're necessary for being able to understand how the cities are actually supposed to start implementing on January 14th. Given the fact that we have this flexibility built into the design standards, the way that we're adopting it, staff's recommendation would be to continue with adopting the design standards now, despite the fact that there is this reprieve, just in light of everything else that the city's required to meet starting January 14th.
And I would just add to that, the biggest issue is if the FCC wanted to give us more time, they had to put that, they needed to extend the time on that shot clock, because we've got to process the applications that come in on the 15th. And we have to have guidance or standards to do that. And as I stated earlier, it would be nice if we had more time, and if we would have had more time, we could have worked with the industry much more closely. But there was a big push by the industry to have the FCC pass this very quickly, and that's exactly what happened. And so that's why we're in the position we're in. That being said, over the next couple weeks, after this resolution has passed, if you decide to pass it tonight, we will still be very happy to meet with the industry, listen to their comments, and if there's validity to them, then certainly, as Ms. Hinman mentioned, we can amend those design standards administratively.
And I will say as well, one of the things that we strived for in the design standards was understanding that we don't know what are all the possibilities out there. So there are already currently built into the design standards some flexibility. For example, at the very beginning on page 1, it says any small wireless facility design that deviates from these design standards must receive individual written approval from the city's planning director. So it necessarily is already starting that idea of, we understand we don't know everything. We will be evaluating as these applications start coming in and we start having these conversations. There's more examples, but that's just the first one that pops out in the design standards. And that leads into the can-tenant issue. And so I think that's something that will be resolved as we start talking to providers. Our consultant has provided us with examples from manufacturers who say that the 5G deployment can be housed within their light poles. So, I mean, it's one of those things that's going to have to be a discussion where it's debated out, because we're getting conflicting information from our consultant who we've hired and who is an expert in this field. So, Chris, I don't know if you have something you want to add.
I would address, there was one comment on the ordinance, and it was brought up by Ms. Allen. So we can fix if there is a conflict. It was pointed out that 4.01.07 sub B, it's a greater of the two, not an either or. So that's something that we're happy to look at, and we can correct that for second reading. If indeed we've got that wrong, we can bring that back on the 24th and get that corrected. The other thing I'd respond to is the comment about a prohibition in Villebois. I point out that both Tews Road and Graham's Ferry Road, which are the perimeter arterials that surround the Villebois community, have Cobra head lights along them. So there appears to me to be ample opportunity on the perimeter of Villebois for 5G deployment, given the light standards that are there, as well as the standalone poles that we've obviously suggested would be permitted within the community itself. So don't see that quite as a prohibition, but maybe a limitation or some other constraint that's not appropriate. And then the fees, yeah, I can see the point about the fees, and until we get this figured out, we have to charge actual costs. So that's why we structured it the way that we did for the city to actually collect actual costs.
Yeah, if I may add,
Yes.
one of the things that we have been told by our consultant is because the FCC says we have to collect our actual costs, we can't even look at what other cities are charging because that's not reflective of our actual cost. So the options were either hire a consultant and do the analysis that essentially FCS did for the application fee and do that for the technical design review, which we didn't have time or money to do. And it also doesn't account for if we have to have outside consultants come in and analyze any of these deployments. Or say, we're going to treat this as a deposit and we will then do a true up at the end. And that was the recommendation of our consultant, given the time constraints we were operating under.
Okay. Council, questions for staff?
Just a second.
So let me start with one question. How many different carriers with their own approach and their own equipment are we currently engaged with in Wilsonville, and how many might we expect to be engaged with at some point in the future?
That's a good question. So with the carriers, I would say there's probably AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, Sprint are the main four, but then there's also vendors or third parties that they work with, so mobility. I'm trying to think of a couple. There's been like 2 or 3 others that have reached out in some form, let's say over the last year or so.
So that being the case, that you've got at least 4 majors and maybe some others, likely some others, is there any possible way we could tailor our rules to the proprietary equipment of each of those individual manufacturers or installers in any practical way?
I'm not sure that's possible. And one of the, if Chris, can you go back to the drawing of the appropriate deployment? One more, keep going, right there. So the one that's on the right, if you remember, this is a depiction that we received from our consultant that the manufacturer says can house multiple providers' equipment. Now, I don't know if that's accurate or not, but that is the information we've received from our consultant. So there may be possibilities that some deployments can work with multiple providers, but that's not information that we necessarily know at this time, and I'm not sure we'll ever fully know that.
Okay, I see that as a problem. As to fees, it's a problem for a carrier to not have an exact fee. It's also a problem for the city to not know exactly what they can charge legally or what the answer is to what is our actual cost until we kind of get some experience built up with this. So I think we're on equally uncertain footage, perhaps, with the private sector on that point. Do we use a true-up fee process in any other instance with development community? And how does it work?
It's,
I believe on the traffic we do. Isn't that what engineering said?
for traffic. What are you thinking? I was thinking that on larger capital projects that, you know, there's a true-up process that we go through when the private sector is constructing something on behalf of the city. So that's kind of an extreme example that's not really very applicable to this.
Unfortunately, I'm not sure if one of the engineers in the back might, I'm not sure if Patty or Dominique know, but there was discussion about one type of fee where we do a true up, and I believe it was related to traffic studies that the city performs, but I could be misremembering. But we did have this discussion internally, so.
Patty Nelson, city engineer. Yes, we have our traffic studies are a cost recovery. So it is something that developers come in, they pay us, we hire a consultant to do the traffic study, and then they reimburse us those costs.
So we've used that kind of methodology successfully?
The other thing I would add to it is we really don't have a choice. because the FCC is the one that mandates actual costs, and that was based on what the industry wanted.
They lobbied
So-
for it, yeah.
Yeah, so if they would have set a reasonable fee or a fee similar to what you charge other carriers or something like that, but they didn't. They said actual costs, so.
So
and
now
what
we're in the
we've done-
box of having to be
Yeah.
able to
I mean, how do
document
you
and
know?
establish what actual is.
Yeah, because we haven't had anybody yet, and as you noted, one company may have one set of equipment, another company may have something completely different, and so you can't even, I mean, that's part of the problem here with sometimes, I mean, we saw this with the marijuana legislation. It went through very quickly, and then there was several oopses in there. That doesn't make any sense. It had to go back and get fixed a couple of times. I think there's similar things, maybe what we're finding out here. The FCC acted very quickly. It was very surprising to cities and local governments, but it is what it is. Those are the regulations we have to be under now, and we have to meet their time frame. So that's what we're trying to do. Now, I think there is great benefit to meeting with the carriers. The other issue is 5G really isn't even out there yet. It's still being developed. So 5G is really, I mean, and I'm not the expert, the carriers are, but it's an advanced 4G. It's faster, carries more data. So I don't even know if the carriers all know for sure what this is going to look like yet. So we're doing the best we can, but we've got this deadline. So by that deadline, we've got to have these things in place, and we will work with them.
Does staff have any comments with regard to the suggestion that undergrounding equipment's not viable?
Well, I hope it's viable because we've been doing it for many years.
One of the things that we, when we started this process and in looking at other cities, because originally we were going to say everything underground, other than the antenna. And in looking at other cities, it became pretty obvious that allowing some of the equipment within the pole is appropriate, and our Public Works and IS staff confirmed that there is some, it makes sense that some of the equipment would be above ground, and seeing that deployments happen where it's housed within the pole, we feel like that's an appropriate accommodation to our typical undergrounding everything requirement.
Okay. Councilor West.
Am I correct that if we don't have design standards by a given date, we don't have any say in what this ends up looking like in our city? Am I right? And the carrier's version of what's a blight and our version, which is a blight, could be vastly different, because I'm sure that the carrier's interested in shareholders and we're interested in neighbors.
Right, so right now, if the design standards weren't passed, what would be in effect is our code, 4.800 through 4.814, and that is really geared towards larger cell tower deployments. It's not really geared towards small wireless facilities. So that's exactly right. We wouldn't have a good starting point to talk about what these should look like, because yeah, those standards really aren't geared towards this type of deployment.
Are the standards that we've set almost like a worst case guesstimation idea that we can build off of? Or because you said they could be amended, or how flexible are we able to be with these carrier partners?
So what we did was we reached out to cities that had already done standards, and ones where we heard the carriers were able to work with those standards. And we got copies of those and modified them to fit with Wilsonville. We do have some standards in our code that are actually more stringent, most likely, and carriers would say, well, there's no way in the world we can do that. And so what we were trying to do was balance and read the regulations, stay within the regulations. Now, that being said, we may not understand exactly what the limitations of a cantenna are. But again, the cantenna idea, I believe, came from Denver, where they're actually using it. So I think what we have is a really reasonable, good starting point. I don't think that we've gone too far one way or the other. We've tried to keep a fair middle ground, because that's what the FCC requires. Again, though, as we start having companies come forward, and we haven't had any yet, we'll be learning more. And certainly if these individuals are representatives from the companies are starting to meet with other cities, we'd love to have them schedule a meeting with our staff. And then as we learn more, the city engineer and the planning director do have the flexibility to work with them to modify.
Yes, and to Ms. Jacobson's point, that's exactly what we did, is we looked at, in particular, the main one that we relied on was Denver, because it's also utilized in other cities. Some cities have taken it almost verbatim from Denver, their standards. And Denver I've personally talked to the public works person who's in charge of the small wireless deployment for Denver. And they've had great success. And so we use that as our starting point. There's some modifications that we made specific to Wilsonville. We also looked at probably maybe 6 to 8 other cities where they've already implemented some standards and pulled, where we liked their language a little bit better. But I wouldn't say it's a worst case scenario. I say we tried to take from what we viewed as the best case of what's out there.
Okay, other questions?
No additional questions?
All right. So council, I think then that we are up to the question of what is your pleasure with regard to ordinance number 831. We will talk about 2720 separately. Where we have 831 for first reading.
Mayor, I don't think I think I interrupted you earlier, and I don't think you closed the public hearing.
I think I did.
He did.
Did you? Okay.
You did.
Yeah.
Didn't finish?
I didn't think so, yeah.
Sorry.
If there's nothing further that we need, I will close the public hearing at 9:44 and ask the council, what is your pleasure with regard to ordinance number 831 on first reading?
Your Honor, I move to adopt ordinance number 831 on first reading.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. We adopt ordinance number 831 on first reading. Discussion.
I don't know. I don't want to jump on the people who are here, but it's hard for me to be sympathetic with the industry in this case because I don't really know, but I think I have a pretty good idea what industry's role was in getting the FCC to do this order, and particularly the timing of it. I mean, this is it seems to me a case of better be careful what you wish for, because industry has gotten really wide open stuff in this FCC order, which is going to come back and be a problem, especially, I think, in cities like Wilsonville. When you say you want predictability, there is no predictability for us in this. We don't know what we can charge. We don't know what standards are going to work, and yet we've got to work under this extremely tight time frame. It has put cities in a bind, and what's our choice here? But to respond as quickly as we can in the best way we know how. Wilsonville, unlike Tigard, unlike a lot of other cities, has been very aggressive on the aesthetics of getting our utilities underground. And if you live in Villebois, you know this. But anywhere else in Wilsonville, in Courtside, in Park at Merrifield, all of our neighborhoods, with the possible exception of Old Town, everything is underground. We spent millions of dollars putting all of Wilsonville Road from one end of the city to the other end underground. So to all of a sudden have these, not those, but these extremely ugly things suddenly be allowed, and I've seen some of them in other cities, and they are really ugly. And we would not allow these things anywhere. This is just, I mean, I don't mean to get all all worked up over this, but really, Wilsonville has, it is a blight, especially when the city has worked for, these many decades, 20, 30 years, to get our utilities underground, allow our trees to flourish, all of these things. And the money we've spent on light poles alone, us or the developers, on really good-looking light poles. Some of them I like better than others, but that we're going to uglify them up like this. This is terrible. So, I mean, I understand we might need to make adjustments, but we are up against a wall here in terms of trying to get a handle on keeping the standards that the community is accustomed to and moved here for, and all of those things. It's that's the aesthetics that is here, and I have no doubt that I mean, how do we know what you want predictability? That this is what we have to do in order to get 5G. Well, what about 6G, 7G in a couple of years? They're going to be, I don't know what. We're going to have giant antennas on all the roofs. Where do we get to make community standards if it's not here? Because the next technology says you got to do all this other stuff. Anyway, that's the extent of my communication.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councilor Ackervall.
I think it's kind of hard to add to that. But I do want to say thank you to staff for trying to address this quickly. And thank you also for adding in flexibility for the future for all of us to grow in our understanding and interpretation. And I know that a lot of hard work and research has been put in to get to the point that we're at now. So I want to acknowledge that, as well. We're talking about short timelines, but I know that considerable work has also gone into where we are now. So thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor West.
I'll just, for full disclosure, I'm a Verizon customer. But I am horrified by the prospect of a Star Wars droid sitting outside my house and looking at RTD2 every single day I drive down the street. I did not move to Wilsonville to have to potentially go from no utilities, like Charlotte Lehan said, above ground with beautiful trees, to space adventures. And I just think that it's interesting how the carriers, and like Charlotte said, it's maybe unfair, but to say that they need predictability, but then we're backed into a corner and they don't expect us to advocate for our own neighbors. And that we also need predictability. And I'm in awe of the city staff and their ability to be incredibly nimble and efficient to try to do the best, absolutely the best job they could, considering the circumstance. I mean, it's absolutely commendable and impressive, and I don't know if every city could have done that. Maybe I'm partial to Wilsonville. And I mean, there's other concerns that haven't been brought up that, as an RN, public health is a major issue to me. And maybe we need more time to see the ramification of this, but there is concerns of radiation and what kind of effect that could have on the population. And so often industry has moved too fast before we could actually take a look at things. And then before you know it, you have Aaron Brockovich in court. And so I don't want that possibility in Wilsonville. Maybe I'm being a little bit hyperbole, but it's not like it's never happened. So, I mean, I think that we're being as flexible as we can be, and I'm impressed, and still trying to work with the carriers. And yes, 5G is important, and yes, new technology is important in business and industry and smart cars and trips to the moon, I guess. But maybe my 12-year-old understands this better than I do. But yeah, I am absolutely terrified of the fact that we could potentially have what we've seen here. So that's my opinion and my 2 cents on it.
Well, thank you one and all for your observations. My view is much the same. I do not find it credible to say that what the city of Denver is doing doesn't work, because clearly things are working in some other places. And I think that acknowledging that and the fact that our staff has reached out to other places to get true experience, is very, very helpful and commendable. I thank you for all that kind of work. There's no doubt that adjustments will have to be made. I think that the flexibility to do so being built in is critical, and I perceive that it's there. I also concur with the perspective that the industry asked, pushed, tried to get the FCC to promulgate these rules, and now having done so, we're prodded to action within a time frame and in ways that we were not anticipating to need to. And yes, we have to do the best that we can to be true to the values of Wilsonville and the people that live here and the community and neighborhoods that we have built. And maybe that won't be perfect, but we're going to need to do the best we can. I think it's incumbent upon this council to take that charge seriously, and I firmly believe that putting something into place, including design standards within the original time frame, is very important and very critical. That does not mean we want to be inflexible in discussions. I hope that we will have discussions with the industry. It does somewhat concern me that we have a wide variety of different industry people that may well have different equipment, different perceptions, what they perceive as different needs, and we have to set some baseline. And I think that that's kind of what we're doing here, is setting a baseline of what the expectation is in Wilsonville. Wilsonville is, one of the fastest growing cities in the state, has been for more than 10 years. We are home to 25,000 people. We're home to about 25,000 jobs with a payroll of $1.1 billion. I think that the communications industry is going to want a piece of that and are going to figure out a way to be here. I don't expect us to get left behind. Yes, there are challenges. We know from our development over a period of years that we have had high standards, and that both the residents and the business community has endorsed that by the way they have chosen to come and locate in Wilsonville, and maintaining the integrity of the community, both at a residential level and a business level, is important. That said, I hope we will be able to find a way to embrace and utilize 5G technology as it becomes available. I think that the amount of data flying around is going to continue to increase and is going to be important to business competitiveness. And I think that our residents and our businesses are looking forward to finding that kind of service from the communications industry. So there's lots of opportunity in Wilsonville, and I think that within the framework that is proposed here, that we can achieve that. At least that's my viewpoint. Any other comments from council before we take action? If not, I'm going to call for the vote on the motion on ordinance to adopt ordinance number 831 on first reading. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Passes 4-0. Thank you very much. That will bring us to new business on resolution 2720.
All right, I'll read that one once again. Maximum number, or I'm on the wrong page here. Okay. Resolution number 2720, a resolution of the City of Wilsonville approving the city's small wireless facilities planning application review fee, technical design review fee, and right-of-way access fee, and adopting design standards.
Thank you. Staff, is there any additional information you want council to have in mind as we consider Resolution 2720?
No, nothing.
Okay. Council, any questions for staff with regard to the input that we have had, both from staff and from the public, that might pertain to 2720?
Nope. On a motion.
Yes, if that's the council.
Your Honor, I move to approve resolution number 2720.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Motion and a second to approve resolution 2720. Any further discussion? We've had discussion related previously. If that is the case, I will ask for the vote. All in favor of the motion to approve resolution 2720, please say aye.
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 Aye. Passes 4-0. Thank you very much. I do encourage the industry people to be in contact with our staff and make appointments to bring your specific technical information forward with us. Thank you. Bringing us to continuing business, ordinance number 830, second reading.
Do you want to do anything about 10 o'clock?
Mayor, I think you're going to have to, we've reached the witching hour. You're going to have to get a motion in a second.
We do. Is it already? So our protocol says we will not go beyond 10 o'clock without a specific motion to do so and approval from the council. We have one item of business and a couple of reports left on the agenda. What is the pleasure of council for continuing the meeting?
Your Honor, I move to continue the meeting for these last few items.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes 4-0. We shall continue with ordinance number 830 on second reading.
Ordinance number 830, second reading, an ordinance of the City of Wilsonville approving a zone map amendment from the Clackamas County exclusive farm use zone to the village zone on approximately 25.69 acres in the north central portion of Villebois from 110th Avenue to Calais East subdivision south of Tews Road to Berlin Avenue. The land is more particularly described as tax lot 7200, 7290, 7300, 7400, 7500, and 7600, Section 15AB, Township 3 South, Range 1 West, Willamette Meridian, Clackamas County, Oregon. This is a polygon applicant.
Thank you. The first reading of this was by the 2018 council. Now the second reading is by the 2019 council. I don't know if that means participation questions. I guess our new member, it's up to the new member whether he feels like he is fully familiar or...
So Councilmember West was not here for the first reading, and I think he's familiar with it, but certainly there's a quorum here, so if this is on just the zoning, it's nothing else. If he wishes to vote it, he feels like he's well-educated and he watched the prior testimony, he could, but he can also allow the council who actually did to make the determination.
Okay.
So I would just say whether or not I abstain.
Yes.
I abstain.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So that's fine. Staff, is there any further input since first reading on this item?
We have
Nothing to my office.
no, nothing.
Anything
Planning.
into the planning department? Any additional? Okay, nothing.
Okay. Council, what is your pleasure with regard to ordinance number 830 on second reading?
Your Honor, I move to adopt ordinance number 830 on second reading.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded, we adopt 830 on second reading. I will ask for a roll call vote. Please, all in favor?
Counselor West?
Abstain.
Counselor Akroval? Yes. Counselor Lehan?
Yes.
Mayor Knapp,
Yes.
and Counselor Stevens is excused.
Thank you. So it passes 3, no opposed, 1 abstention. Thank you very much. Bringing us to City Manager.
Happy New Year.
Thank you. Same to you. Legal.
I just want to thank you all for the very thoughtful input that you gave tonight on the 5G. It's been a difficult and challenging situation that's involved a large staff team, and so your support is very much appreciated, and your thoughtfulness.
Ditto.
Thank you.
You bet. You bet. Anything further?
No, no.
If not, I think we will call adjournment at 10:03.
Under the belt.
Right, there you go.